The sun had begun to set, painting the sky a brilliant canvas of orange and purple. Shops along the narrow streets were closing their doors for the day. Among them was Sam, a man who had once enchanted audiences with his masterful puppet shows, his tales woven with strings and wood. However, times had changed, and his marionettes no longer brought the joy they used to, not to him, nor his dwindling audience. But as he strolled along, a glimmer of hope caught his eye in the cluttered window of an antique store. Amidst the dusty books and faded tapestries, something drew him in. A forlorn marionette, uncannily lifelike, its paint chipped and strings tangled. It had a strange, sad beauty to it. Seeing the puppet felt like looking into a mirror, its worn-out face reflecting Sam's waning passion for his art. He found himself stepping into the shop, the bell above the door chiming softly. The store smelled of age, wood polish, and a hint of mildew, the aroma of stories lost in time. The shopkeeper, a gaunt old man with a graying beard, nodded at him. "Help you with something?" "The marionette in the window," Sam said, pointing towards the puppet. The shopkeeper's eyes twinkled. You've got an eye for the curious," he mused, handing Sam the puppet. As Sam took the marionette into his hands, he felt an inexplicable connection. It was as if the puppet had chosen him, had been waiting for him. He could see past the peeling paint and the tangled strings. He saw its potential, its yearning for restoration, and maybe, just maybe, a chance for his own redemption. He spent the next few weeks painstakingly restoring the marionette. He repaired the paint, delicately brushed on new layers, untangled and replaced the worn-out strings. Every night he would sit at his workbench, the world outside fading into the background as he brought the puppet back to life. The marionette was a sight to behold once Sam finished restoring it. Its charm was captivating, exuding an uncanny aura of life. As Sam worked its strings, the puppet moved with such grace and fluidity, it almost felt as though it was a living, breathing entity. With this newfound marvel, Sam was reinvigorated. He started performing again, this time with an energy that had been missing from his shows for a long time. His audience, once a small group of children and their accompanying parents, started growing. Word spread about the puppeteer whose marionette moved as if it had a life of its own. Among the audience, there was one face that stood out, the town's grumpy baker, Mr. Brown. Known for his frowning face and sharp tongue, Mr. Brown had started visiting the shows regularly. At first, Sam was pleased to see the change of heart in the old man. One day, during a performance, Sam made the marionette perform a complex routine, one that involved a sequence of quick, intricate movements. It was then he noticed something strange. From the corner of his eye, he saw Mr. Brown mimicking the same movements. He dismissed it, thinking it was his imagination playing tricks on him. Over the next few shows, however, Sam began observing a pattern. Every time he moved the marionette, Mr. Brown would unconsciously mirror the puppet's movements. The realization sent a chill down Sam's spine. Could he be controlling the baker through the marionette? Determined to confirm his suspicions, Sam began experimenting subtly during his performances. He'd make the marionette perform uncommon movements, a salute, a shimmy, a high kick, and each time Mr. Brown mimicked the action, oblivious to his own antics. The crowd laughed, assuming the grumpy baker was merely playing along for entertainment. With each confirmed connection, a knot tightened in Sam's chest. He felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. He had tapped into something extraordinary, something that broke the boundaries of reality as he knew it. The world was suddenly a much larger, more terrifying place, and he was standing on the precipice of an abyss that promised to swallow him whole. As the days passed, Sam struggled to reconcile with the reality of his discovery. The old puppet show was no longer a simple, enchanting performance. It was a dance of control, the strings of the marionette entangled with the life of the town's grumpy baker. He felt a thrill each time he performed, the crowd's laughter ringing louder as they watched Mr. Brown mimic the marionette. They thought it was all part of the show, a secret agreement between the puppeteer and the baker to add some novelty to the act. Only Sam knew the truth, a secret that was as captivating as it was terrifying, but the power of control came with a heavy burden. One evening, during a particularly animated performance, Sam made the marionette enact a sword fight. As the puppet deftly parried and lunged, mimicking the movements of a seasoned swordsman, Sam saw Mr. Brown across the square, mirroring the actions with a baguette. The crowd laughed, but their amusement turned into gasps of shock as the baker's playful mimicry led him to stumble and cut his hand on a broken bottle. The reality of his actions hit Sam hard. He was not just a puppeteer, he was controlling a man's life, forcing him to dance on the strings he manipulated. He felt a pang of guilt, a sense of dread that hung over him like a dark cloud. He decided to stop using the marionette, at least until he could figure out what was truly going on. As the puppet show ceased, a hush fell over the town. Children no longer filled the square with their laughter and play, no longer mimicked the graceful movements of the marionette. The joyous atmosphere had been replaced by a palpable quiet, a void filled only by the rustling leaves and the distant murmuring of the wind. Sam could feel the town's disappointment, its longing for the captivating performances that had briefly brought life and color to the otherwise ordinary days. He missed the joy his puppet shows brought, but the cost was too high, the guilt too heavy. Sam, once a well-known and loved figure, found himself retreating into isolation. He sat alone in his workshop, the marionette resting in a locked cabinet, its silence mocking him, a constant reminder of the uncanny power it held. He would often stare at the marionette, lost in thought, wrestling with the mystery of the puppet and the invisible strings that controlled Mr. Brown. How could he break free from this curse? How could he ensure the safety of the unwitting baker? One day, as he was lost in his thoughts, strolling past the familiar stone buildings and the quiet town square, something odd happened. An involuntary wave, a friendly smile offered to a passing child, but it was not his intention, not his thought. His body moved on its own, his actions disconnected from his will. He paused, shaken by the experience, but chose to dismiss it as a figment of his overworked mind. However, as the days turned into weeks, these instances of involuntary movements became more frequent and more pronounced. He found himself performing actions he hadn't willed, his body behaving as if it were tethered to an unseen force. Fear wrapped its icy fingers around his heart as he came to a horrifying realization. He too was a puppet, his life manipulated by an unseen puppeteer. His days became a chilling dance with uncertainty, his every action tinged with fear. He felt like a marionette, his strings pulled by an unknown entity, a ghost in the machine. This was not just a battle for control anymore, it was a fight for freedom, for the very essence of his free will. As he gazed at his reflection one stark moonlit night, he made a promise to himself. He was determined to break free from this haunting control, to regain his free will, and to protect those around him from his unwarranted influence. However, Sam had no inkling of the great sacrifice that freedom would demand. After acknowledging the chilling reality of his situation, Sam found himself in a state of constant vigilance. Every action he took was scrutinized, every thought analyzed. His life had become a haunting waltz on an unseen stage, and he felt the crushing weight of the invisible strings that bound him. But within the heart of this puppet, a spark of rebellion was kindling. Sam spent his days locked in his workshop, the marionette resting ominously on the table before him. He contemplated it, the enigma that had ensnared him in this uncanny dance of control. As a puppeteer, he knew the art of control, the mastery of pulling strings to create harmonious motion. But how do you fight control when the strings are unseen? The puppeteer unknown? Days turned into weeks as he sat alone, wrestling with his predicament. His heart ached for the joy his shows used to bring, the vibrant life they used to infuse into the town square. And yet, the memory of Mr. Brown's mimicked actions and his own involuntary movements served as stark reminders of the danger that lurked within the marionette's charm. One day, as Sam was poring over an old book on lost folklore, a story caught his attention. It was a tale of a brave warrior who defeated a mighty demon by outsmarting it, turning its own power against it. The story resonated with Sam. An idea began to form, a desperate plan fueled by the tale's wisdom. In order to break free, one must use the very tool of their captivity. The marionette, the tool of his captivity, could also be his key to freedom. What if he could manipulate the puppet in such a way that it would force the unseen puppeteer to reveal itself? Or better yet, what if he could sever the connection completely, liberate himself and Mr. Brown from the invisible strings that puppeteered them? An audacious idea had taken root in Sam's mind, one that required a daring gamble and an unyielding will. He had decided to turn the marionette, the very instrument of his and Mr. Brown's manipulation, into a tool for their liberation. The plan was dangerous, fraught with uncertainty, but it was the only glimmer of hope he had to regain control, to sever the unseen puppeteer's strings. As he set about putting his plan into action, he began to imbue every waking hour into creating a puppet show like never before. Every prop, every stage design, every narrative detail was meticulously crafted with his unique touch. It wasn't just a puppet show. It was a spectacle of defiance against the unseen puppeteer, an audacious act to regain control and free will. The energy he put into the preparations was different. Less of the carefree joy he had experienced in his early puppeteering days, and more of an urgent desperation. His workshop was filled with a constant flurry of activity, the echoes of hammering and carving late into the night becoming a staple in the quiet town. Rumors spread, whispers of a grand puppet show, and the anticipation began to ripple through the town, the air dense with excitement and curiosity. As the curtain rose, the townsfolk erupted into cheers. Sam, heart pounding in his chest, took his position behind the grand stage. His hand tightened around the marionette's strings, a lifeline to the perilous performance about to unfold. Among the sea of faces, he spotted Mr. Brown, the baker's usually stern expression replaced with a cautious curiosity. The show commenced, the marionette springing to life with each tug of Sam's strings. It danced and twirled with more vigor than ever before, its movements so fluid and lifelike that the crowd gasped in awe. However, beneath the spectacle, an undercurrent of deadly manipulation began to weave itself. Without warning, the unseen puppeteer seized control. Its intent was clear: to turn Sam's act of rebellion into a deadly performance. The marionette, under the unseen force's control, began a dangerous dance towards a large, menacing saw that Sam had incorporated for a dramatic effect in the show. Simultaneously, across the square, Mr. Brown started to move in tandem with the puppet, his body being drawn to a large butcher knife lying ominously at his stall. The crowd, once enraptured by the performance, now watched in horror as the jovial show turned into a spectacle of impending disaster. The laughter was replaced with gasps, the joy with fear. Sam's heart pounded, his breath hitched. He knew he was the only one who could prevent the looming catastrophe. He was the puppeteer, the only one who could cut the strings. But doing so required an unimaginable sacrifice. With every fiber of his being straining against the unseen puppeteer's control, Sam defied. It was a silent, strenuous tug-of-war under the open sky, a battle between the puppet and the puppeteer. His eyes never left the marionette, the mirror of his actions. His mind was set, his determination unwavering. In a supreme act of defiance and with a cry that echoed across the square, Sam thrust his arm into the path of the saw. The sharp blade cut through the flesh and bone, and in that gut-wrenching moment, Sam's arm, the hand that once masterfully controlled the marionette, was severed. The impact sent the puppet flying away from the saw, its strings no longer under the command of a puppeteer. The connection was severed, the strings of manipulation cut. The town square erupted into a cacophony of screams and gasps, but amidst the chaos, one thing was clear: Mr. Brown was unharmed. The butcher knife lay untouched, and the baker stood still, free from the dance of manipulation. In the wake of the grand spectacle, a sobering stillness spread across the landscape. Sam was a hero, but he bore the deep scars of his victory, a stark reminder of his immense sacrifice. His puppeteer's hand was gone, and with it, the marionette's dangerous dance had ended. But for Sam, it was a symbol of his reclaimed freedom, the severed strings of control. Sam retired from puppeteering after the incident, not because of the loss of his hand, but because he felt an undeniable shift within himself. The marionette lay dormant in his workshop, a relic of the past, its charm and allure replaced by an eerie silence. The story of the puppeteer and the marionette was now an indelible part of the town's narrative. While he was no longer a puppeteer, Sam's storytelling spirit remained. He took to writing, transforming his life's experience and insights into engaging tales. His narratives were more than mere stories. They were vessels of wisdom. They echoed the harsh truth of control, the immense value of free will, and the unfathomable sacrifices one might have to endure to reclaim it. Life moved on in the quiet town, but the echoes of the grand puppet show never really faded. Sam's story served as a reminder of the human spirit's resilience and the undeniable thirst for freedom. And though his hand was no longer there to pull the strings, his words continued to dance, weaving tales that would resonate with the townsfolk. and perhaps with the world beyond.